Good afternoon. Welcome to this meeting of the Economy and Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'm obliged to inform you that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Members of the public will be able to view the meeting using the link on the agenda. We'll now move to item 1. Apologies for absence, and we've received apologies from Councillor Gary Birchett, and when he arrives, Councillor Roy Aldcroft is substituting. Councillor Dean Carroll, Portfolio Holder for Housing and Asset, and Councillor Ian Nellins, Deputy Leader and Portfolio Holder for Climate Change, Environment and Transport. Item 2, disclosable interest. Members are reminded that they must declare their disclosable pecuniary interest and other registrable or non-registrable interest in any matter being considered at the meeting as set out in Appendix B of the Members' Code of Conduct, and consider if they should leave the room prior to the item being considered. We now move to item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. So we're going to consider them. Anybody, any comments? Anything to say? No? Thank you. In that case, we'll move on to, do we need to vote on that? We do really. Is everybody happy with them? Can I have somebody to move them and second them as well? Julian moving and Rachel seconding. Everybody happy? Yes, we have do you want to abstain then?
I abstain, so yeah, sorry.
Okay, so we'll have an abstention then. Thank you. Now, item 4, public questions. We have one public question, which is from Miss Siobhan Connor on behalf of Shrewsbury Quarry Flood Action Group. Claire is going to read the question and Mark Barrow, Executive Director of PLACE, will read out the response. Thank you, Claire.
Okay. The Shrewsbury Quarry Flood Action Group would like to submit the following question to the Economy and Environment Overview Scrutiny Committee on the 14th of November 2024. Shropshire is experiencing more frequent floods and severe rainfall events due to climate change.
I'm sorry. Sorry, would you like to start again?
Yes, start again.
Yes, please.
Apologies for that. Okay. Shrewsbury Quarry Flood Action Group would like to submit the following question to the Economy and Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 14th of November 2024. Shropshire is experiencing more frequent floods and severe rainfall events due to climate change. Flooding from both rivers and streams and surface water affects residents and businesses, sometimes repeatedly in recent years. Predictions are for this to get worse, and to the extent that adapt or die is now being heard. Shropshire Council is the lead local flood authority and has a legal obligation to provide a local flood risk management strategy. Flood and Water Management Act of 2010, paragraph 9. The LLFA is charged with developing, maintaining, applying and monitoring this strategy. Shropshire's flood risk management strategy was produced in 2015 and it has not been reviewed or updated since. Many serious floods have been experienced by residents and businesses in Shropshire since this time. When will an updated strategy that properly reflects the flood situation experienced in the last decade, particularly in the last 4 years, be available? Please would the committee recognise the risk that not having an updated plan poses in preventing risk to property and people, and also in obtaining necessary funding? Please would the committee agree to reinforce the need for the LLFA to receive the appropriate funding, additional resources to meet its legal obligations in managing flood risk? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Just to respond, before I do, to help with the acronyms, LLFA is Local Lead Flood Authority, which is Shropshire Council in this case. So our answer is Shropshire Council's Flood Risk Manager has been recently discussing the update to the Council's local flood risk management strategy with the Quarry Flood Action Group and other flood action groups across the county. And the update to this document is currently underway with the Council's engineering consultancy WSP assisting with this task. The new strategy will look to focus on how the Council can better support communities before, during and after flood events, and the Council are currently working towards an initial draft of this document early in the new year. At this point, the flood risk manager will be engaging with the Shropshire Flood Action Group Forum, which is made up of the chairs of each of the flood action groups, to undertake an initial review before working towards a final version. It should be noted that the local flood risk management strategy sets out how the council responds to flooding, but does not affect any funding bids or the allocation of recovery funding following a major flood event, which is set at government level.
Okay, thank you very much. If I can just ask before you speak, because I didn't get introductions at the beginning, if you say who you are and what your position is. And Kate Halliday, I'm very pleased to welcome you as lead on the task and finish group on the water quality. Please come in whenever you want. Okay, thank you. Do we have anyone wants to ask any questions, or do you want to just go into the next time?
Sure.
Yeah.
Look, the question did specifically also ask the committee to reinforce the case, so I just think it's appropriate that we should do that. I don't have the wording in front of me, but could you just repeat the bit of the question which was specific to the committee?
There were two bits. So the first one was committee recognising the risk that not having an updated plan poses in preventing risks to property and people, and also, sorry, forgot the microphone again. So is the committee recognising the risk that not having an updated plan poses in preventing risk to property and people, and also in obtaining necessary funding? And also, would the committee agree to reinforce the need for the LLFA to receive the appropriate funding and additional resources to meet its legal obligations in managing flood risk?
Okay. So
Okay.
Did you want to say something?
yeah, so on that final, it's suggesting that there's a need for additional funding resources to meet legal obligations.
Sorry, can you speak up?
Sorry, the question is sort of suggesting that there's a legal obligation. There's a need for additional funding or resources to meet the legal obligation, presumably to actually have a decent strategy. So whether or not there is, I don't know, but I just think that we as a committee ought to, reinforce the case for this to be brought forward as quickly as possible, and also request that we get a look at it as and when there's a draft.
You could ensure that happens. Mark, would you like to comment on that?
Certainly, Chair. Our later item might help you with this as well, because it's not just resources from this council, it's resources invested by the Environment Agency. Actually, their equivalent in Wales, Natural Resources Wales, their investment is also important on many of our communities as you get close to the border, as well as Severn Trent. So there's a bit actually about how that's all pulled together. And I think the presentation Hayley's going to give will get into some of that, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So if we can just, yes, Roger, sorry.
My division has never been invited to be a member of a flood action group, of a group. There are houses that are being flooded, roads that are being flooded. So I note it's being taken back to the Flood Action Group Forum, but I would suggest it needs to go back to all members and also to parish and town councils, because many parish and town councils have had requests from residents who have had problems with the recent flooding. So the wider that the information goes, the better, and the better will be the result.
Noted, and I think we can do that, can't we?
We can.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. Anything else on that? No. Okay, item 5, members' questions. We have none. So we'll go straight into item 6, strategic development relating to water management and water quality. Thank you, Mark.
So, Chair, joining us on the screen, who you can see the largest face of all on the screen, is Hayley Dyton. He's our Strategic Partnerships Manager. Hayley's been leading a lot of work in this area, and perhaps I should have introduced John Bellis for those of you that don't know who is our Flood Risk Manager. So Hayley's got a presentation just to take you through.
Hello, everybody. Is that on the screen? Can you see those slides?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you. So I'll provide an overview of our strategic work in relation to water management, and hopefully through that you'll see how Shropshire is taking quite a leading role in this space, and we're actually seen as a national thought leader around water management. We've secured significant investment, and that's additional to those normal investment programmes. We've established frameworks for partnership working, and we're influencing and shaping future investment programmes. We're looking at water in the round, so rather than just flooding, water quality, water resource, we look at it as a whole and the integrated system around that, and the different roles, responsibilities and funding sources to manage that at scale and address current and future challenges. And as a rural authority, we see many opportunities for how we can use water management as a real enabler and catalyst for wider ambitions around growth and resilience. Just taking you through, I thought I'd share kind of a variety of what we're doing strategically around water. Starting off with the River Severn Partnership, that's our source to sea framework, recognising that we've got Britain's longest river network, and that's a real asset to us and how we drive water management. The policy approach we're taking in relation to development and new thinking that we're kind of leading with DEFRA around that and adaptive planning. The challenge of water quality, which we're all fully aware of, and how we're going beyond regulation in the Clun catchment. And then the work we're doing kind of in that thought leadership role and innovation. So we've secured a national innovation region pilot, and then working proactively with Severn Trent at strategic level and operationally, and likewise with the regulator, the Environment Agency. So just picking up on the first of those from a flood management point of view, I think these statistics probably not new to you, but I think worthwhile reflecting on kind of where we are from a flood management water point of view. We live in a very volatile kind of catchment area. The Severn Basin kind of shifts annually from having too much water to then kind of being in kind of dry flow conditions, and we're topping it up kind of with the Shropshire groundwater scheme. So you can see there some of the kind of impacts. That's flood zones at the top. If you add surface water onto that, then obviously those impacts are much greater. You can see there also the impact of climate change. So flooding forecast to result in a kind of 1.5 metre increase on flood peaks in the future. But equally, we'd be bouncing into 25% less water available for abstraction. So you can see that volatility there that we're going to have to deal with. And then the climate change is kind of really increasing the frequency and severity of those events. That data has led us to set up and lead the River Severn Partnership. So we jointly chair that. Mark's the joint chair, along with the Environment Agency. And this is really about doing things at scale and doing things differently. It takes a whole river basin approach, so it includes the whole of the Severn, all the tributaries and the Wye within it. It brings together all the local authorities, so starting in the South in Mid Wales, all the way down to the Bristol, Avon. All the kind of water companies, all the regulators, so that's Environment Agency and Natural England, wildlife trusts, academics, and a whole range of government departments. So this goes beyond DEFRA into Homes England, into Department for Transport and others. What it's aiming for is providing an integrated approach to how we manage that river system. So we move from local risk management, which we're all doing individually as local authorities, into catchment scale asset management. And that will help us drive greater change and those wider benefits. And you can see on the right there, that diagram is aimed to show those interdependencies beyond water into energy, into agriculture, food production, health, and our own organisational resilience. We've secured more investment through this partnership than that catchment has ever seen. So that's totalling over 50 million so far, and an additional 4 million in just the last 12 months. We've got a great platform for lobbying, so we've got ministerial support for it and a whole range of conversations going on around it. But we're also within that focusing on short-term delivery. So moving on to that short-term delivery, Shropshire Council, as part of that partnership, is leading a demonstrator programme. Hopefully you'll have seen this come through the cabinet process last year that agreed for us to lead this. There's 8 projects that we're leading in partnership with the Environment Agency, but also with key delivery partners. So in here is the North Shropshire Farming Group, the Wildlife Trust, Oswestry Town Council, Severn Rivers Trust and Chester University. We can provide more detail on any one of these projects, but I've also at the back of this slide deck, I've given you the link to the River Severn Partnership website. And on there, we've got a whole host of videos that are showing these projects in delivery. Importantly, though, we're managing them as a whole programme because it is about that integrated whole and how we go forward. So within that, some of them are testing nature-based solutions, so things like wetland creation, woody debris dams, and then other projects in there are testing things like green finance, how we deal with farm economics and make some of this work part of kind of farm businesses. There's work going on around peatland restoration, sustainable drainage in urban areas like Oswestry, which I know John will come on to later, work on skills, and then some really exciting work around the whole kind of digital technology space. Many of these are now in delivery, and using that River Severn Partnership website, you'll see the delivery that's happening through the videos. The remainder will kind of go into delivery from the end of this year, and the programme runs until March 27. By the end of it, we will have delivered 108 hectares of improved habitat that manages water and 11.5 kilometres of improved river habitat, again around that water management. In addition, we'll have a whole host of tools, frameworks that we can then use in wider work that we're doing kind of over the longer term. In relation to that longer term piece then, so we have a 2100 climate resilience strategy that is being developed. This is being led by the Environment Agency, but they are leading it through that River Severn Partnership, and therefore Shropshire Council is a key partner in it. This will set out the long-term management plan for the Severn Basin, so that includes the why. It will provide us with that integrated approach that recognises the whole connected system. So although it's led by flood, it will pick up water resource and water quality as well as those wider benefits. It's currently in an early scoping stage, and the Environment Agency are hoping to get this to business case by the end of the year. £10 million has been secured in principle, and that business case will then help us unlock that funding to move it into delivery. From a council perspective, this is really important for us as we can link this work into our growth plans, into our local nature recovery strategies, into our infrastructure planning, and it will therefore help us have a joined up approach to kind of resilience as we move forward. The other longer term piece that's taking place is the Severn Valley Water Management Scheme. So this is the first stage of delivery within that wider 2100 strategy, and it deliberately focuses on the upper reaches of the Severn. So that's Shropshire and Powys predominantly. And it's right that we start delivery in the upper reaches of the catchment, and then that strategy will help us move it and replicate it down the whole length of the Severn. You will see on this slide here the scale of the challenge. So we are looking here through this programme at trying to store the equivalent of 65 billion litres of water to deal with the kind of flood and climate impacts. And that's the equivalent of the 26,000 Olympic swimming pools. Interestingly, data from the Environment Agency over the last couple of years reported that the groundwater, Shropshire Groundwater Scheme, was pumping a similar amount of volume into the river system to deal with prolonged dry weather. So again, that shows that volatility between high and low flows. We had agreement from yourselves to join the Joint Project Board in February this year. So we now sit there alongside the Environment Agency, Natural Resources Wales and Powys County Council as the collective leads for this programme. And we are, through the work, we will be bringing forward a whole kind of series of nature-based solutions and some engineering solutions that look at reducing flood risk, but again, look at also that wider water management piece. It will also look at how we use that to unlock wider economic benefits, drive environmental and kind of land use change, and increase social value for our community. So again, it's that kind of integrated holistic approach. It's a really exciting programme, I think, for us, and it's putting Shropshire Council at the forefront of water management. Mark and I have just come off a call with DEFRA leads. They're really interested in what we're doing. Welsh Government equally. We're having conversations with the National Infrastructure Commissions and Treasury. And importantly, we're also having conversations with landowners. There's a lot of landowner interest to get involved in this project and see what can be delivered. From a council point of view, in that joint project board, we are leading work around the local engagement, but also the benefits piece and the funding and finance. I just thought it was useful within that programme to show the engagement that's now taking place. So as part of that joint project board, there's a detailed engagement plan. We've just kicked off community drop-in events around this programme of work. So that started in Wales last week. There'll be 2 more events in Wales before Christmas, and then 2 events in Shropshire. So Oswestry on the 13th of January and Shrewsbury on the 29th of January. Alongside those community drop-in events, we're leading technical working groups. So they are focused around environment, around health, around economy, development, and kind of funding and investment. So a whole load of stakeholders involved in this early shaping. And it is just the start. You will see through that kind of programme on the slide there that we are aiming for various stages of consultation leading into a strategy by the end of 2026. From a flood and development point of view then, we recognise that there's currently a bit of a disconnect between the National Planning Policy Framework and the thinking that's going on in DEFRA around water management. So the planning framework requires us from the outset to consider what the climate might do. So we're having to make assumptions about the future climate and then make sure our policies and any design of development builds that in. From a DEFRA point of view, though, they think that that means we're either under engineering or over engineering because it's so assumption based. So they are now advocating something called adaptive planning, which is about putting the emphasis on modelling and monitoring. Monitoring over modelling. So that ongoing monitoring where we can have trigger points and understand at which point we need to bring in interventions rather than doing it all up front. So we, again, as that kind of proactive approach around water management, are taking that DEFRA thinking and we're applying it to our riverside regeneration work. We're working here with Severn Trent Water, with the Environment Agency, and we've also commissioned technical support from Arcadis as our flood leads, and we are progressing an adaptive flood strategy for the regeneration work that's happening around riverside. What that means is that we will bring forward a suite of options that we can then deliver over a period of time, depending on what that climate does and what's needed. Initially, that's going to include parkland areas in the initial phases of development. So that's about the surface water management and the links between that and the river. We've got feasibility work now taking place on potential for a linear defence along Smithfield Road. Within that strategy, we also want to look at the public realm and how we could use the river frontage in a linear park to bring that linear defence in line. And also we're linking it into that wider Severn Valley water management work, which will give us the longer term protection. That's the flood picture. From a water quality point of view, this is an area that's getting significant focus. So through that River Severn partnership, we in fact have a board meeting coming up at the end of this year where we'll be reviewing the future focus of that partnership, and it's very likely that water quality will be where we pivot. As you know, we've got significant water quality issues, most notably the Clun catchment for us, where we have an embargo on development, but we're also working through the Marches Forward partnership with our colleagues in Herefordshire around the Wye. It's complex for water quality because there's lots of different contributing sources, and it will require kind of cultural change. We also have differing approaches across partners. So conversations are going on with our regulatory partners at the moment around what interventions we can bring forward to manage water quality that will restore rivers, and what interventions we can bring forward around water quality that will mitigate development. And they're seen quite differently. So that's impacting some delivery at the moment. Having said that, as a council, we are progressing. So this is work that hasn't yet been published. It's kind of in its draft form, but we are bringing it forward. And it's a study around how we implement interventions around water quality in the Clun as a council. The recommendation will be that we move forward with a local authority-led strategic scheme, and that we use developer contributions to help fund that. So as part of that approach, we're now looking at what those interventions might be that we could lead. To do that, we are piloting work around our innovation region. So this is the funding we got through the River Severn partnership to look at digital technology. And we want to pilot here. We're just kind of building the case for it, but we want to put some digital sensors into the Clun catchment that will help us look at the baselining of water quality, but it will also help us look at real-time monitoring of the water quality. And that, if we hopefully get it into delivery, will provide a real step change, not only for us locally, but nationally. Monitoring of water quality, as you know, is undertaken by the Environment Agency as the regulator, and they do that periodically. If we can show that this is effective, then it will provide a real test case and a proof of concept for how we do it remotely and also in real time. What we then want to do is, once we've got those sensors in place, is to assess the effectiveness of sediment traps on our highway outfalls. And that will then help us show what interventions we can bring forward through development and through development contributions that improve that water quality situation. I think it will also be a great example of how we're using our innovation to influence others. So we will be sharing all this monitoring approach with the Environment Agency because that will be in their future responsibility and remit. More broadly then, on the kind of innovation piece and that thought leadership piece, all the work that I've kind of talked through so far has gathered interest from others. There's a national event, it's usually held in Telford, Flood and Coast, and we have been asked to share the work we're doing there. And that's actually, that request has come through all the environment consultancies interested in what we're doing and how we could shape their future work. We've also been asked to run a workshop with Adept nationally around all the other local authorities on what we're doing in water and climate resilience. And we've also run workshops with the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors and the Royal Town Planning Institute around our work and the links to development. We've hosted a Treasury visit and we've got ongoing engagement with Treasury and ministers. And we will be shortly kind of following up with the Secretary of State for DEFRA around coming to our area to visit and see what we're up to. Our Marches Forward partnership work, the cross-border piece with Wales, we're positioning our proposition there as being a trailblazing region around green growth. And that's because of all the work we're doing around water management. And then the innovation region that we've secured. So we've got a programme running at the moment of 3.7 million, all around that advanced wireless digital technology. But we've already got conversations ongoing with them around how we take that forward into a future year with additional funding to scale up. And that's supported through conversations we've been having through the National Infrastructure Commissions. I don't know, I can't see, is Matt Smith in the room? He was going to run through, you're there, Matt, I see you wave. You're going to pick up on the innovation region piece.
Thanks. Hi everybody, I'm Matt Smith. I'm the Programme Manager on the River Severn Partnership Advanced Wireless Innovation Region. You can shorten that, I'd love it. We're a 14-month programme, so fully funded by DSIT. So although we're operating in Shropshire and other counties, and Shropshire Council are responsible for the project, it's fully funded by DSIT, which is quite a rare thing nowadays. And we are kind of here to invest in projects which kind of demonstrate the applications of wireless technology in the hope that then it encourages wider adoption in the commercial market for technologies. And because we're sort of within the umbrella of the River Severn Partnership, we've got a number of sectoral focuses. So obviously water is a key sectoral focus, but also rural. Obviously Shropshire is a particularly rural county, but most of the other counties within the RSP area are as well. And then we're also doing work in the public sector. And the slide there gives you an indication of all of the what we call use cases, but basically projects that we are currently investing in. The water ones there, Hayley's already mentioned the Clun Valley Water Quality Management Project. I'll go through the other three in a second, but two things to note. We are still adding to the list of projects, although we're completing in March. Two of those new projects that are likely to come on board. One is looking at water quality in terms of wild bathing areas. So looking at E. coli in particular levels in the river system. And another one is looking at smart water butts, which can create extra capacity for rainfall and release that at periods where there's a requirement to get water into the river, but obviously hold water back when there's periods of intense rainfall. So those two projects are likely to come forward in the next few weeks. And one other project probably on there that might be of interest to you is an ammonia reduction project, which we're working with a agricultural data company in the north of Shropshire, who also act on behalf of 26 poultry farms across the region, but predominantly in Shropshire and Powys. And the idea there is that we're investing in a range of sensor technology to pick up the ammonia emissions coming out of those poultry sheds, and to combine that with other data sets that company has got available to them in a way that we can understand what generates the greatest degree of ammonia emission, and try and get all of those farms to normalise a much lower rate. So that one's in progress. If you go to the next slide, please, Hayley. So this is a smart abstraction project. This is running currently in the Strine. So the Strine pretty much within the boundaries of Telford and Wrekin, but obviously the project has got implications for downstream, which does affect Shropshire, and it's something that we may be looking to extend out to other areas of the region, fingers crossed, next year. So it does have some relevance. We're running this project with Cranfield University. A number of our projects are run through universities, obviously, because they're sort of leading edge with these sorts of things. And this project is installing a range of water level sensors across that subcatchment area. So we know we've got a really, really detailed understanding of the flow rate at any given point in that catchment. It's also combining that data with historic data that we've got from the Environment Agency to build a hydrological model. So we can do some predictive analysis on what happens within that subcatchment. It's fully operational. We've got data already. They are building that model now, and that model will be then applicable to other areas, so we can lift and shift to other subcatchments. Funding obviously subject. Yeah, so we think it's got significant potential. We'll probably only see the results of that in the next few months, but we think the early indications are it's going to be a really, really successful project, something we can kind of, like I say, lift and shift. We will be doing some demonstrator days as well, so we'll probably get some invites out to councillors to go and have a look at that. That one will probably be in March. Next slide, please, Hayley. This one is in Shirehall, so this one is in Shropshire. This is a precision irrigation project, and it's using, again, it's actually working with Cranfield, but also with PDM, the horticultural company. And it's looking at a number of their fields and putting in 3 types of wireless sensor, one looking at soil moisture at different levels of the soil base, one looking at evapotranspiration, and then a standard sort of weather sensor. And again, it's combining all of that information into a single irrigation management system, so we can automate a process of irrigation through those fields. The beauty of this is that there's a threefold benefit. So number one, actually making sure the optimal irrigation is within those fields, reduces the water going in, so the water coming out of the mains. It reduces the energy costs for the business, and it should increase the yield by 10%. So again, it's something we're really positive about. It's one of the early projects we ran, so we've got 2 crops worth of data so far, and that's all feeding into this new model. And the model, when it's built, can then be applied to other commercial farms. So we hope it's got quite a lot of potential. And then the final one, please, Henry. This is network as a sensor, so this is a really, really bleeding edge project. This is something that we're working with on Vodafone. The Vodafone have got around 170 radio masts across the River Severn partnership area, and obviously you can see kind of see those red dots on the River Severn map. Each one of those has got a radio on it, normally going in multiple directions, and each one of those radio links is impacted by rainfall and moisture in the atmosphere. So it's data that gives us an indication of whether there is moisture in a low atmosphere, which is an area where we don't have a great deal of information on. So when we know the signals are being impacted, we can convert that into precipitation data, and we can blend that with ground weather stations that the Environment Agency run, and also the radar stations or the radar data that drives the weather forecast that you see on TV. Brings all of those 3 things together and gives it a much more accurate, we hope will give a much more accurate picture of rain. So we can do some nowcasting and tell people exactly what's happening where and when. And it can also drive a predictive model, so we can actually be better at understanding when rainfall is likely to happen. We are currently working on converting that data and putting it into a data visualization tool, and we've got a number of local RSP partners that are working with us to understand how they could consume that data and use it in anger. And also the Met Office are on the other side of it, using that data as well to see how they can implement that into their national forecasting regime. So fingers crossed, if this one's a success, it will actually impact the way we see the national forecasts.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. Before we move on, do you want to say anything, John, from the drainage and flooding, or do you want to just take questions?
I think I've got my own section.
You've got your own
cover, yeah.
section. Okay, then. Mark, do you want to say anything before we take questions?
No, Chair.
No?
Questions?
Okay, questions, Julian.
Thank you very much for the presentations. I think when I looked at them earlier, there was something about it that was troubling me, and I wasn't sure what it was. And now it's come clearer. And I think so. This will sound a bit, well, it'll sound like a challenge, but I think so. What it seemed to me is that we're hearing a lot of work going on around measuring and understanding and modelling and data. But there were only two comments, which were specifically about actually getting landowners to change behaviour, because in the end, all of this requires landowners to do something different. And so there was one comment about, you were beginning to get some engagement from landowners, but okay, it was just that. And then you made a comment about changing practices in terms of ammonia. But I think we really need to get to grips with how are we building a relationship with landowners? How many of those and the other thing I'm bringing to this is looking at it through sort of just transition lens, because we know that there's going to be very different stories. There'll be some landowners who are very comfortable, there'll be some who are really struggling. In that situation, you've got to find a way for that to be a just transition to new ways of working to really support them through that. So how much of all of this work is actually going to lead to changes of behaviour by landowners, and are we on that journey already? What are we doing with those businesses on land, whether it's chicken farms or other types of landowners and managers, to really drive that change in behaviour? Because in the end, that's what all of this has to lead to, doesn't it? It has to lead to a different way of managing land.
Thank you, Chair. I think firstly, the National Farmers Union and the County Land and Business Association are part of the partnership. They're part of kind of working groups, and we work with them as kind of associations for landowners, across the whole catchment. And that kind of sense of what issues there are that are real for them have kind of featured in the agenda. Slide 5 gave a list of some of the demonstrators, so slowing the flow type solutions, working with the farm community, some of those things about peri-peatland and kind of practices around kind of, peatland restoration, that sort of stuff. Julian, I think we're all part of that. The pilot that National Trust are driving at Attingham Park is deliberately as a model for large land ownerships. That kind of sense of managing water within a landscape, within an estate, actually is something that we could roll out. So, and then there's a whole kind of stream of what's called March's Future Farming, which is getting into sustainable farm practices. So one of the things in there, and as Hayley referred to, we just come off a call with DEFRA that we're helping kind of shape is what is that reward mechanism for the landholding community for holding water for social good, for example. So if you're going to ask a farm, let's say in Melville or Edgerley, to hold water in the winter that's just for social good, what's that reward mechanism through the farm payment system? So that's all content within the agenda of the partnership. The other bit is that, how do we provide kind of investment opportunities in that kind of whole catchment around, if we can invest in those nature-based solutions, those kind of farm improvement programs, that produces a social good for everybody. What does that kind of mean? How do we capture some of that value? So there's a lot of work on in that kind of sense as well, Julian. So just to reassure you that, absolutely working with landowners is the key to this whole future solution. Don't want to dwell too long on it, but we mapped out literally with the Environment Agency from Shrewsbury right up to the 2 reservoirs in Wales that are the source of the Vermey and the Severn, on a meter grid basis. So we know exactly what the capability for land is to help tackle all of these kind of issues. And within that, being able to model what is the maximum we could get for nature-based solutions versus civil engineered type solutions. Answer is it will be a blend, but the point is also we're not only able to kind of have this general engagement, we know where and probably with who we can get the best effect for that.
Can I just follow up with what we want? So those demonstrators, I was looking at that list, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my assumption was that they were all on either public land or third sector land, if you like, national. No, they're not on private land.
No, yeah. So for example, Gillsfields is on farming.
Great.
Yeah.
So we're beginning to get some prototypes of working with private landowners on this.
Perhaps at some point in the future we can have it. You can come back and tell us about that and how it's progressing.
Certainly, Chair.
That'd be a good idea. Right, Rob.
Thank you, Rob. Was got feedback there. So okay. Okay. Sorry. I'm Wilson, the councillor in Copthorne. I think it's really exciting. I think it's really interesting. The thing that's missing for me is the immediate impact on residents. It feels like we're doing lots of high-level thinking, long-term thinking is really good. But we've had, in the last 2 months, 2 of the worst days of rainfall we've ever seen. And a lot of this stuff's going to take a long time to come down the track. So I'm thinking about the things which residents are going to see on their doorstep. And one, I guess John will be able to answer about leaf clearance. It seems to me particularly bad this autumn that the leaves have not been cleared. All over, everywhere I go in town, it's particularly bad. Most street scene has suffered cuts like everywhere else has, and that's clearly having impact. I think on one of those days when it was particularly wet, I was cycling and I could literally see the water just going straight over the grates. It wasn't going into the drainage system, and it was flooding places which have never really been flooded before. So it's the problem we're facing now, that surface water coming out. And I'm thinking about what are we doing about permeability. I thought a little bit in there about depaving in mortar, but actually, are we really thinking large enough? Like, we know that's the solution. We don't need to go and try in mortar to see if depaving helps. We know that depaving helps. So what are we doing in terms of supplementary planning documents? What are we doing in terms of, I think I wrote to John, I think earlier in the month, about what the Dutch are doing in terms of tile whipping, they're calling it, where they're basically encouraging all municipalities to challenge themselves against each other, the competition to replace grey with green. And that's businesses, local authorities, residents. I'm seeing an increasing amount of astroturf gardens. What are we doing about that? What are we doing about when people say they want to convert their driveways? All of this stuff is adding to the problem, and we know the solution. We don't need to go and do research about it. We know the answers, but we need to have the policies in place. So what's happened with those kind of planning policies? I guess that's my general question.
Before we move to Sandra to respond to that, the depaving in Morda is actually on my patch.
Okay.
There's been huge issues for a long time. Sandbags have been used and everything. And I can assure you, I mean, we had surveys out yesterday, and the residents are over the moon because they are getting flooded. So no small scheme is too small. That's what I would say to you after years of suffering.
But then I say, we know that's probably, we know it's everywhere else. So why aren't we doing it everywhere else? Why are we just doing it there?
I don't think we're just doing it there.
Yeah.
I think it's rolling out.
So the two questions really for John about leaf clearance and keeping that accessible, and what he's doing with street scene, and probably to Mark, I guess, about supplementary planning document, actually getting into Cornova. I know you look at Cornova, there's brick everywhere on the ground. Is it really that permeable? Could we be doing more?
Okay, John.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I mean, it's a yearly problem. I think we all know that. The leagues over gullies, and it is a really difficult one. And I think obviously as a council where we are financially, we are probably being a bit more reactive than kind of just having the sweepers out there all the time. So yeah, it is a tough time. We are trying to move with the gully cleansing. We've now got our own in-house teams rather than relying on contractors, so it does give us a lot more control. So when we do have those big flood events, we've always got those tankers out on the network. We are in control of where they're going, but we can't be everywhere all at once. And that's the reality of the situation. We do our best. The teams do their best. I think that it is down to reporting. I know that's not the best answer, but reporting everything via Fix My Street. And we will just get to things as and when we've got the resources available. But it is a tough time, and I can't hide from that.
Okay, did you want to come back, or you?
Yeah, I guess it's we're seeing lots of resources in the presentation, and John is saying he's lacking the resources, and there seems to be a disconnect there to me. And that's no real point to John, because he's doing what he's got.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I think building on what John said, so yes, our street scene service has suffered from, a reduction in resources. The teams are working really hard to prioritise what they can. We've got broadly about 99,000 gullies in the county. It is a huge undertaking. How we got through the flash surface flood in October, I think actually was quite remarkable in terms of the lack of disruption for a month's rainfall in a day was really quite significant. I think part of the answer to your question, though, is there's a short, medium and long. And the other bit that John has been leading is all those grant programmes around flood protection measures that are the immediate defence things for properties. The covers on air bricks, the barriers on doorways, that kind of stuff. And we've done particularly well, I think, at kind of promoting and securing resources from government for that. So there's a very short term, which is how are we kind of maintaining the network as best as we can? How do we work with the Environment Agency to make sure they do their bit and the water companies do their bit? And there's a bit about those most vulnerable people that are suffering today. How do we support them? And there's been lots of engagement with various town and parish councils, that are particularly affected. The medium bit is, where are those interventions that just could be done within the next few years? Maybe it's a riverside, maybe some other measures that just improve the issue and drop the level of risk. The longer term bit is the stuff that Hayley's really been talking about. But just to bring that to life, none of the environment agencies' flood defence measures are climate proof by their own measure, none of them. So all of them have to be replaced. So this is a big picture, long-term kind of strategy that kind of structures what needs to happen by when. So the quantum of what you deal with in Shrewsbury is a fundamental bit about what flows from the catchment above. So all that work that's happening from Shrewsbury to the reservoirs now changes all those fundamental assumptions for what eventually hits Shrewsbury and then goes through Shrewsbury onwards. So that's the big part of the model. So I think the reassurance to everybody is we are leading. DEFRA tell us we're leading this nationally, but not soon enough. How do we get big schemes in action? That timeline that was shown of December 26 is the completion of a business case from DEFRA that sees the triggering of all of those kind of interventions between here and Wales. So that is potentially a programme of £500 to £700 million worth of investment. It is that huge. So that's the big picture piece. In terms of the specifics around planning, and Hayley pointed out in the presentation the links to the local plan, we have got Eddie West on the call. He's off screen. Oh, he's just coming on. Chairman, whether Eddie would like to kind of add something, if that would help Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Eddie.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. I think just responding to that particular point about the flood risk issue, I think, which was the point. Going back to the local plan, I accept that we are at an interesting stage of the local plan, and we obviously are waiting to hear back from our inspectors to see how and when we can proceed. But putting that aside for a second at the moment on that, in terms of what is in the draft local plan, which is at examination, we do have a suite of policies all around water management, including flood risk. And just to give some reassurance that the allocations that we are proposing have all been through what's called a sequential process, which is part of the plan making, I suppose, necessity that we have to go through in order to allocate the right land effectively. So that's really quite important in that context. There will be other sites which come through the system as well, and the policies set in place require that same sequential process and or exception process to be applied as relevant. And effectively what that means in practice is that at all points in the process that flood risk should be avoided, and that includes not increasing the risk elsewhere. That's quite an important part of that process as well. So that's ingrained into the draft policies in terms of flood risk. There are also other suites of policies around the efficient use of water as well, which is important, and I think was a particular issue when this group talked about what they wanted from a potential planning process. So that's there as well. So I think the answer to your question, because you mentioned about supplementary work and supplementary planning, and I think that has come up, and there is a process and there is a potential that we can look at how best to add some value to the policies in the local plan and the draft local plan around how that is actually implemented in practice through the design of new development. And I think that is, where we will get most value as a council in supporting the wider planning process in making better decisions on that. So does that help at all with answering some of those questions?
It does to an extent. I think there's the policy and then there's the implementation. I think we've probably got the policies that we think should lead to having permeable surfaces and grass and trees and everything else. But the reality is, when we see a new housing estate go up, like Weirhill up the road or whatever we built at Surrey West or Surrey, it ends up not being what we intended. So clearly the policies aren't strong enough right now. That would be the point I would make.
Okay, if we can do that. Okay, we've got Ed and then Dr.
No, just a quick one. Just talking about landowners and farmers. Do we envisage any problems moving forward? Farmers' willingness to engage in this, for if they're giving up their land for social good, the incentives are going to have to be pretty substantial. Farmers aren't very happy at the moment. How's that going to pan out? We're saying we're relying on farmers here. I think of my division where the river runs from Shrewsbury near enough up to the Welsh border. That financial incentive to store water on their land to make it economically viable, if their farms are going to be so much more viable now than they perhaps have been, it's going to have to be substantial. And what's the willingness?
So the feedback from the NFU is in the geography that Councillor Potter describes is broadly there's an 80% dependency on farm subsidy to one degree or another to make those farms viable. So it's absolutely fundamental. And that's our work with DEFRA, which is how do we help switch some of that funding so that farms are no worse off and possibly better off. Because what you want is also investment. The local system for managing this on bunds, they're called ARGIs, is kind of, farmers maintain ARGIs. It's that kind of sense of sustainability of the rural countryside. Farmers need support through that funding reward mechanism to maintain that. And they also need to be rewarded for that social good. The other bit here that DEFRA are really concerned about is farmers having access to the land. They're desperately keen on farm security and food security. So that kind of sense of how this all adds up is kind of part of that whole equation as a reassurance. So that's part of the work that we're doing with the NFU to really kind of understand what it is that the farm community wants. To be fair, when we've met them and we've met the various groups of them, they're really clear about that. It's just how we bring it to life and make it happen. So, just to reassure you, we're right in that space, focused on that activity.
I can tell you've got a follow-up question, Ed.
Yeah, my concern is if farmers take the bat and ball home, then we are sort of stuffed with that, aren't we?
Yeah.
Just to add, Chair, so I mentioned in that analysis work that we've done that potentially 65% of all our future water solutions could be solved through natural flood management. The reason you won't get anywhere near that is some farms will go into, slowing the flow and leaky dams, others won't. And there's a bit about how can we realistically plan for that, because of course it requires maintenance. So again, they will say, are you going to give me some kind of reward for maintaining these things, not just paying for them up front? So it is a big and it's a complex question, and it's quite a large number of people that we're dealing with as part of that community.
Nick, your question.
I thought what Roger was next.
Oh, sorry, it was Roger.
Is it? Yeah.
I didn't write you down, Roger. Well, I heard you, but I didn't. Yeah, Roger, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Come back to the question that was asked from the public, and I highlight the second sentence: flooding from both rivers and streams and from surface water affects residents and businesses. I'm hearing a lot about rivers and streams. I'm hearing very little about surface water effects from the streets. My area is not involved in any flood forum, although the Ray Brook flows through some of it. You've never been invited to a meeting. No, not participation. But many roads and streets in my area were flooded. And I'm hearing nothing about what preparation Shropshire is doing should it happen, a little bit like Malaga or Valencia in Spain. If that happens, what is Shropshire Council thinking that they would do now if that happened next week? Because it would be catastrophic for many, many residences, not only the towns, but also the rural areas. And I'm not hearing that at all. I see the flood action plan also, as whilst I'm here speaking, and I see to reference of the previous speaker, to review, to confirm, to establish, developing partnerships. Nothing happening now. And that's what residents want to know now. If Valencia or Malaga happened here, and it almost happened a few weeks ago, but if that was repeated 2 days later, where would we be? And I can see nothing before us today saying what we as a council would do. We need to clear some of the drains and gullies during the summer, not only now when the leaves are falling down. I can take it to gullies and drains where I can see the leaves, and residents are going out to clear them, but some residents aren't able to, but we are suffering. I can show you pictures of cars which thought they could get through the water because they've got through it before, and the cars are write-offs. So it's those streets, and as per the question, from surface water effect, residents and businesses, what are we doing about that?
Thank you, Roger. John, would you like to respond?
A couple of things there. So I think it's important to understand what the highway drainage network is designed for, and that is to drain the public highway only. So I think when we had the flooding on the 16th of October, we had a lot of runoff come off the land. What normally happens is it runs onto the highway, and then the highway's drains that are designed for what we would say a 1 in 5 year flood event, they've not been designed to cope with that. Even if we had a grade A highway system that had been jetted the day before, it just can't deal with the volume of water runoff from the land. So to point the finger at Shropshire Council for that, I think is a bit unfair. What will normally happen is that flood will sit on the highway until a point where the highway drainage network can start to deal with it, and then it will drain away. I think the advice to drivers is to not drive through flood water. So that's essentially where we are. We can't be everywhere again. The highway drainage network isn't designed for these events. And if people do encounter flooding on the highway, take caution and please don't drive through flood water. That is the advice from the council and me as flood risk manager. So I think that's the first part. If we did have a situation like Malaga where we had a really intense rainfall event that lasted over several days and a year's worth of rain, we would be sitting at TCG, Tactical Coordination Group, would be sitting within Shrewsbury. So that'd be police, fire, potentially even the military. And that's where we would then plan our response effectively. So there are processes in place to escalate an event as and when it happens. We work with emergency planning colleagues and the other agencies to effectively respond.
Can you just remind me before we go any further, how many miles of road have we got in Shropshire? Because we've got one of the biggest, haven't we?
A lot, I think.
It's what,
3,500
miles.
5,100.
And that's first or second biggest in the country, I think? Second, yeah. So it's an awful lot to do.
I think
that's the reason.
Just linking back into some of that work around natural flood management is around slowing that flow from farmland. So that kind of bigger picture, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to work with landowners, and going to one of Ed's questions, we're not necessarily asking landowners to flood grade A agricultural land. We're looking for that land that maybe isn't as productive, that maybe could be used for flood storage. So that's the approach that we need to take, and landowners need to play their part in it.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Just to add a couple of points to that. So the Department for Transport issue code of practice design guidelines and everything to do with highways and highway drainage. One of the things that they're doing is kind of reviewing what that guidance needs to be in the context of climate change. Firstly, so that's, I think, a helpful just to kind of understand, which is government's model for what were previously 1 in 30-year type events are now increasingly much more than that. The second bit, just to expand on what John was saying, is there is now quite a significant number of, or should I say, areas of farmland that are rented off rather than farmed by the owners themselves. Now, of course, in those situations, what we're finding is ditches are not maintained in the same way. So there's a big piece here in terms of working with the farming community in terms of management of that estate to help with that runoff problem that John described, because that isn't always clear in those tenancies. So I think that's kind of just a wider bit just to share that we are talking with NFU colleagues, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. And I just wonder how the different ways of farming now actually affect the runoffs, because a lot of farms have actually shut down, haven't they? And that must have helped. It's not being used. You wanted to come back? Roger, I've got a couple of other people, but is it follow on?
It is, and it is about the ditches and the overgrown ditches to aid that water escape. They are many, as has been highlighted by Mark, they are not being kept clear as they were, but I can't see that mentioned anywhere in this report on our Shropshire Council contacting, and it isn't only landowners, it's owners of houses with large gardens. Some of those are ditches in there, and I can take two that I can think of who had ditches and they are not being cleared, and it's causing adjacent neighbours to have floods. So, but I can see nothing here about maintaining or where residents can go to ask for that to happen, and that's where I'm coming from. It is the preparation for it and how and where residents can be directed to.
Isn't that what Fix My Street is for?
Yeah,
It's on private land.
yeah. I mean, Fix My Street can be used on that. If you can cite the highway adjacent to where the issue is, it can be reported via Fix My Street. And it is, like you said, landowners' responsibility to maintain a lot of those ditches. So my team, we act as the Land Drainage Authority for Shropshire Council. So we do have permissive powers under the Land Drainage Act to engage with landowners who don't maintain ditches. So you can come to me with any of those issues. We can go out and visit and potentially try and work with those landowners to make sure that ditches are maintained. But yeah, it is private landowners do need to be part of the solution. It's not just Shropshire Highways.
Thank you. If we can move on, Nick.
Thank you, Chair. Notwithstanding the fact that I know we need to be proactive to prevent flooding, but when we're reactive, and I'm looking at this page on the gauges and sensors, I think it is important that the number of gauges that are put in further up the watercourses, for instance, we've got one in my area, which I understand from John in the future is going to be able to tell us where the water reaches a level which is going to cause flooding further on down the stream, particularly in a couple of the villages in my area. Is there an intention to put more of these gauges in place? And do we have to have a certain number of flood events to get enough data on those gauges to be able to start the system where it actually warns people? Because I think it would be really useful, whether it's in the middle of the night or whatever, for 2 or 3 key people in each parish perhaps to be given that information as soon as possible, which would be reactive and help to perhaps prevent flooding.
No?
Yeah, so to get some of the gauges that we've installed across Shropshire. So first of all, Shropshire don't have a remit to provide a flood warning service. So it's not something that's a Shropshire responsibility or anything, but some of these gauges that we've installed have been associated with capital projects. So we've installed quite a few in the Corvedale catchment that was associated with the Natural Flood Management Project. And the one that's in Pontesbury was moved across as part of one of the RAID demonstrators. So we don't necessarily have a base budget to cover the installation of gauges. And we don't necessarily have a remit to provide a warning, but if we could find funding, it is something that we could put into other areas, yes. But yeah, these sensors are independent because obviously the Environment Agency on Main River, they will have their own gauges. These are smaller gauges that we operate independently on all the watercourses.
What's the likelihood of having funding in place?
I say at the moment we have to usually link it into a capital project.
Yeah.
So I don't have a revenue pot that I can dip into for these sorts of gauges.
And you can't use still money perhaps from that area?
Potentially, if yeah, that is something we could look at.
Yes, Mark?
If I can add to that, and Matt's sitting here smiling wryly, is, one of the things that if government extended the funding for the advanced wireless innovation work is to do exactly that, and then maybe amplify that as well, so people get some kind of, quick warning that's an alert system. That's all kind of possibilities, I think, Jen.
I've just written that down actually
So,
for the bid. So we will look to incorporate some sort of warning system in there. I think the issue is always going to be the scale of funding available to get that total coverage across the whole county is you know,
Yeah.
going to be that way.
Nick,
Thank you, but yeah, I would just say that it could be a possibility that self-funding would be suitable for this because it's going to benefit, well, in some cases, large numbers of the community.
and can I just ask a question with self-funding, when it's something as important as this, is there any way of backing? Because we all know it's very clunky, isn't it, getting cell money, but your
A
thoughts?
couple of things, Chairman. Yes, so the sorts of work and the type of people involved in this sort of work is different than the wider kind of set of
Okay.
typical kind of highway or
Yes.
related schemes. So that's something to throw on the table. Eddie would probably be the best guide here on kind of the applicability of, let's say, strategic SILT, you know, or any other form. But I think it's certainly something worth looking at. But Eddie, would you wish to add to that?
Yeah, it was just really to just add that, you know, SIL is there to mitigate the cumulative impacts of new development. So that is the high level assessment that we need to take. And I think that can apply to a whole range of things. We have precisely acknowledged that it can apply to things like this in the future. We do need a good degree of evidence about how much and how it's going to be used and how it benefits new communities. So the test is there. We have a process in place at the council to support that. I see no reason why we wouldn't want to consider this as part of that process.
Thank you. Would you have a conversation with Nick, perhaps, obviously not in the meeting, about how we could possibly take that forward? That would be great.
Yes, indeed.
Kate.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, and it's really good to hear about these projects. They do sound very exciting, and I'm very impressed actually with some of the initiatives that you're taking. I've got and it's also great that Shropshire Council is so involved in this. I've got a question for Eddie and one for John. Eddie, in terms of the supplementary planning documents, and I was chair of the River Quality Task and Finish group, which I think you were referring to earlier. Shropshire Council do have some supplementary planning documents on the website at the moment. The last one, not to do with flooding, or not very much anyway. Last one's been quite a ways away. Other local authorities use them a lot. And I think one of the advantages of them is that when a developer is looking to develop an area, they go to those documents before they put their planning application in. And I think at the moment, whatever's going on, and I think you said some draft policies or some policies, they're fairly hidden. And so I'm just wondering how, because then you're kind of immediately on the back foot then, aren't you? A developer puts in a plan that isn't great and you're then having to go back and say, oh no, you need to adjust this, and that doesn't always end well. So I'm just wondering whether a supplementary planning document, something that we're actually looking to do for flooding, because clearly what happens on developments has a massive impact if they don't have proper attenuation, or I know most of the wastewater is separated, but you know, there are a whole host of things that could be done up front with developers.
Thank you. Be back to respond then.
Yeah, thank you. So SPD's supplementary planning, they are not policies in their own right. They are there to add context and guidance to implement policies in a development plan. So, but they are very important and they can be very useful for precisely the reason you set out, in terms of helping to guide a decision maker and indeed a developer towards a better quality development in implementing the policy. Because sometimes policies can be quite high level. SPDs can produce the detail and implement in how those policies are actually delivered on the ground. So yes, I agree, they are particularly useful. I think where we are, both with the local plan process, but also with what we know might well be coming around the corner with changes to the wider policy framework at the national level, potentially implications on housing need as well. I think it's something we will be looking at across the board over the next few weeks and months, about potentially looking at a range of potentially supplementary areas where we could be adding guidance to support development in Shropshire. I think flood risk is an area we could do that. I think across other areas of water management, and I think particularly water, I suppose water areas, I think we could do that as well. I think one area where I would say we are actively seeking to support this is in around something called high quality design. It's quite a broad terminology. It's something which supports develop management in their decision making more widely. I think we could incorporate wider flood risk management and other water management issues into that high quality design piece of work as well. So there's ways and means we can approach it, which I am happy to have a discussion about. But in general, yes, I agree with you, and it is something we are actively looking at.
Thank you.
And then just a really quick question for John. In terms of the cleaning out the gullies or drains, councillors always get back to potholes and drains, don't they? But there are some areas that flood regularly, including my ward, Long Colon. Is there any kind of proactive programme for those areas? I know you can't always predict where it's going to happen, but do you look more proactively around flood season?
Yeah, so we're currently in the process of pulling together our hotspots list. So rather than going around and trying to clean every single gully across the county once a year, whether they need it or not, we are working on that hotspot list at the moment. So any areas that we know are flood prone, so anywhere within the villages or within the towns, Colon, for example, where we know obviously we do clean up after the flood, but do we need to go down there 2 or 3 times a year compared to somewhere on a housing estate that probably we could leave 2 or 3 years and it would be absolutely fine. So there is a lot of work ongoing on that at the moment.
Yeah, just add to that, Chair. I mean, just to be complete, we have, it was, I think, following something Councillor Evans said, which is we have one rapid response catchment area, which is in Muchwenlock 2. Do you want to just say a little bit about how they're prioritised, John?
Yeah, I think we've got 2. There's Langley as well, which is just up in the north of the county. I think again going back to flood forum areas where we do have the flood action groups, we will work with them and try to work out where those key locations are. Equally, with town and parish councils, we'll have the same conversation with yourselves, and I think that's kind of we're trying to move to that model where we'll proactively go to areas before we have a storm. We'll do it on a quarterly basis rather than once a year. But it needs to be community led. It needs to be town and parish council led. So we need to know from you where those hotspot areas are, and then we can definitely try and get them added onto that list.
Thank you. We've got 2 more questions, which is you next. If you like, Roy, and then it's Julian.
Thank you, Royal Market Drayton. Yeah, new estates. I've got a problem in Market Drayton at the moment where the estate's been completed. Most of the attenuation poles are in and all that type of thing. But in the heavy rain now, they're getting flooding in what were existing dwellings across the road from the new estate. You know, all the drainage is on the new estate. You would think it would absorb what it's supposed to absorb, but it's not. And this won't just be happening here. I would imagine there's 1 or 2 estates that are causing problems as the runoff picks its own way to find the level, so to speak. So I was pleased to hear that Eddie was mentioning about the possibility of still there following development, where you get a guaranteed, almost guaranteed drainage problem following an estate, where we might just be able to use still to resolve the situation we've got, particularly with road surface and diverting the flow from the new estate.
Thank you. We now have Julian.
Thanks. I suppose I'm thinking about perhaps some recommendations, or at least a sort of direction of travel out of this. And I'm picking up on John's really useful, frank, robust response. No, the drains were not designed for this, and they can't cope, and they will never cope. And people have to not drive when we have those sorts of weather conditions, And I think that sort of messaging that we need to be a bit braver about this. And I think that's absolutely right, that we need to say that. And similarly with the landowners, it's all very well us talking to NFU. I've had conversations with Ed before, that doesn't reach everybody talking to the NFU. We need to find a way of talking robustly about the need to manage land differently and find ways to support those who are running businesses on land. In the various hotspots, knocking on doors, whatever it might be, not relying on the NFU to do that for us. I think we need to be more robust there. And then the final one is on development. If we're going to be forced to contribute to the mythical 1.5 million houses, in reality, what that means a different sort of development. It means mid-rise. It means building in a different way. And not necessarily building lots more estates with small gardens and hard standing out front. So I just think I think we need to be more robust, I suppose, about the way we've got to do things differently.
Okay, so we do have recommendations. Tom has written them down very kindly. If you could read them out, and if you're happy with them, on it, or if you feel they need altering in any way, if you want to jump in. When you go a second, Tom, I thought you'd go right to vigorously.
There is more. I mean, I'm very conscious that we're sort of like at a stage in the conversation. There will be more, I'm sure, which will come. So, at the moment, the recommendations are framing around pursuing the use of developer contributions to enable investment. We'll tweak the wording in and around that one. There's one about encouraging the use of Fix My Street to record issues, particularly adjacent to highways. So I'm just picking up on the examples given around the ditches. I think linked to that is that making available or raising awareness of the routes for the public and for members to raise concerns and issues. So that's through Fix My Street, but potentially John alluded to there's opportunity for members to actually raising issues through to him and his team where there might be issues to follow up on. That might also link to, I need to speak to John around the wording in relation to making local communities, local members making John and his team aware of where there are issues, so that might be able to be used to inform forward planning. I think there's something in this around as well, picking up what Eddie was saying around incorporating flood risk management and water quality into the high quality design, just reinforcing that as a message which is there. Picking up what Julie's just said there, there's something about the council, there's recognition around providing clear and robust advice to drivers and communities, both in terms of suitability and the ability of the highways drainage in particular to handle these extreme weather events which are occurring, but also about being safe and making safe decisions as well. And I was just about to start writing down, Judy, the final point as well there in relation to really where do we go next on some of this, but in terms of diverting and looking at how we try and find a better way to move water out of drainage systems as well. But I know John's going to be coming to that. It definitely features in what came out of the River Water Quality Task Force Group work as well. So I'm trying to capture the recommendations as I go. There's a lot coming out of this conversation.
I'd just add into that, Chair, and towards Tom, that I think funding of street scene, I think probably does need to be looked at. I think it's particularly bad. I think there's only so far you can cut, and I think we've now got to the point where I think John's team's probably seeing this, where street scene are not doing enough to help you do your job.
I think we've got to be realistic as members. If there's no money there, there's no money there. But I'm going to come to Mark on that one. I would love to see. I would love to, as a member.
We can go on the house stuff. There's no money left. We find money for some things, and I think this is something that we do have to find money for. Like right now, frankly, our footpaths are a disgrace across the county.
Yeah.
An absolute disgrace. They are dangerous. I have raised this repeatedly with streets seen, and Mark knows this. On this particular issue, it's causing a real problem, and it's causing service workforce flooding to go into people's homes who do not expect it to happen.
Yeah.
And it's a failure of this council. That's.
I think if this is questions about priorities and what
I think we've gone too far with cutting in that area.
Do you want to say?
Thank you, Chair. To be fair, the service has suffered, in a range of ways from a range of budget pressures. The model that it operates at the moment is what it considers to be the absolute minimum, to be fair. So the scope for preventative work is limited in that sense. So it's this kind of, reacting, as John described, to hotspots. The bit that I think is really important is we're waiting for the Department for Transport to confirm what the Highways Maintenance Fund allocations are going forward. So the previous government gave some indicative allocations up to 2032, but there was no cost profile on each year beyond what we've had for the last two, including this one. And you'll have seen that as particularly dealing with things like potholes, but it is much wider than potholes. And there is something about our repair, if you like, prioritisation matrix really favours high-speed, high-risk roads. And then you get a hierarchy down from that. And as Councillor Wilson says, quite often footpaths are not featured in that sense. And there is a growing need for capital investment. One of the things that Andy Wild is working on at the moment, part of the budget setting process, is trying to articulate what's our capital needs to invest in that infrastructure. So it's not just the day-to-day, what do we need? Because some of those areas are now more economically, considered for replacement, to be honest, and resurfacing rather than patching. So there's a capital bit as well as a day-to-day maintenance piece. But the concerns are kind of well recognised within the service.
Is that more borrowing then? If it's the capital schemes, is that more borrowing? If we're not in the best of financial positions.
Depends what government allocates us in that.
Okay,
So we are waiting. Typically, we get our local government settlement, just before Christmas. We are in contact with the Department for Transport around that specific piece. They're not sure at the moment whether the government will announce it as part of our annual settlement or whether it will be part of the spending review, which is being talked about for the spring in the new year. So as soon as we get that, then where I'm going is we could put together a comprehensive programme over a number of years that targets priority areas.
We're actually addressing now the recommendation that was read out by Tom. Any changes or
I think to add to that, we need to be looking to work with town and parish councils more in this area.
Oh, we're doing that anyway. We're trying to.
Well, but I think we need to be going further and faster in this particular area. Thank you.
I think you can comment on that because there are conversations taking part, and I know that you're involved in it.
There is, Chair. Yeah. So we regularly are part of SALC executive conversations about a range of things. We've been talking about what opportunities there are to extend the kind of Lensman type arrangement that some parishes have. And in some cases, that's tied into what could be done with environmental maintenance grant. So it is a live conversation. It is part of what we're talking to towns and parishes as a family at the moment, along with other things. So let's see how that transpires, Chair. But I mean, what we try and do is support local parishes where we can with any activities they're able to undertake.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Roger and Steve. And I got a feeling, Alan, you look like you wanted to say something, but you're not. You're okay. All right. Okay, Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. I understand the position the council is in, and there's finite resources because of various reasons, which doesn't concern us today.
No.
But we are a scrutiny committee. We can find out on scrutiny and make recommendations. Whether the council has the finances to do it, it's got to be decided somewhere else. So we can make recommendations like Councillor Wilson just said and leave others to do it because, okay, and I understand the difficulties there, but as a scrutiny committee, that's the recommendations that come from this scrutiny committee.
Oh, did you want to make a recommendation?
No. I take what Councillor.
I think I made it already.
Yeah, there's a lot of writing going on there. Steve.
Yeah, things there. As for working with the parish councils in St Martin, one of my parish councils, did a lot of work with Shropshire Council. As the parish council, we took over all the mowing within the village, and it's worked very well. And we hope to expand that throughout the county. One has done a really good job there, and I don't know about, and all my footpaths.
Subject, I'm afraid.
Okay, all my footpaths have been cleared. We've done a really good job this time, and the Shropshire Council did a good job.
Okay, that's all right. Okay, so on that note, do you want the recommendations being read out again? We'll just take a vote on this, or should we?
I think we trust him.
I trust him. I trust him. Everybody trust him? Yeah. Okay, so do we need to vote on that? It's a matter of interest there, that we make the recommendation, but we're all agreed, aren't we? Yeah? Yeah. Okay, we'll just go forward with that and move on to the next item. Thank you, Kate. We're on the update against progress made against recommendations from the River Quality Task and Finish Review. It's Tom, but then you'll want to come in.
Well, I won't say masses. I think you've had the document you've circulated. One of the there's been a lot of conversations amongst officers in relation to the recommendations, some of which we started to touch on. I think Eddie already has started to sort of address some of the responses to the first recommendation around grounding conditions. And I think the general conversation I've had with members of the Task and Finish group has been grounding conditions was a vehicle to realise the improved outcomes to river water quality, and was based on conversations that took place with other areas of the country, like as it northwest Oxfordshire, the Windrush against sewage, who the Task Committee was spoken to. The Task Committee group members have been quite clear with me, and I'm sure Kate will correct me if I get this wrong. It's the outcomes which they're interested in. So if we can get the outcomes through, for example, high quality design, then we don't need to follow through on grounding conditions. Then that would very much be part of where they want to get to. But we're coming back today. I think this is really about following up on where that work's progressing. But actually, for me, one of the reasons why we've tried to put this on with the conversation which has taken place is river water quality was very much at a point in time. It's still very topical nationally as well as locally, but actually part of what I think John will cover now is around recognising that building bigger sewage plants and building bigger sewers isn't necessarily going to be what solves the issue, but if there's ways we can handle water differently and we avoid putting rainwater runoff from those extreme events into the sewers, we will hopefully reduce how some of the sewage treatment works are being overburdened in those periods of time. So there's a lot happening, and it fits very much with what's just been discussed. And hope, my hope is that rather than maybe looking at the water quality and this work separately, it becomes very much more a feature of an ongoing focus for members through this committee in relation to what we've just been talking about and through. But I mean, that's obviously one for you to pick up and run with. But that's what I want to say.
Thank you. Okay. Do you want to come in? Do you want to stay before we ask questions?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this was a really extensive review of things we did, and thanks to everybody who was involved. I think the highlight was getting the bathing water status agreed through the council, because I think that's going to have some real long-term benefits already. In fact, I know it is because Severn Trent Water have taken notice and have committed to having only one spill per bathing season in each of the areas that have been adopted. And I think they are going to channel investment specifically into those areas, which is great for those areas. But I think part of this is about looking at this more widely. One of our recommendations is how we encourage other areas to go for bathing water status, for example. So if there's councillors here who think that might be something their area might be interested in. We did quite a lot of work on it at Shrewsbury Town Council level, and it takes some work by local residents, but it's certainly not impossible. And what it means basically is that the Environment Agency has to test the water once a week in those areas in a way that they just don't in other areas. And so that's what grabs the attention of the water companies, because they know they're going to be watched. So thanks very much to Mark Barrow for coming along to the meeting to confirm that. And please look at that for the councillors or anybody listening, whether that could apply to your area. Tom's done a really good little summary of the sorts of things that we would be hoping to aim for. Some of them are quite hard recommendations, and then some of them are softer around, you know, perhaps what we can do as a council to get messages out to the public about, you know, things like how they, you know, what sort of surfaces they use in their driveways, etc. Working with local schools. I don't want to kind of run through the whole report. People have had it, but I wonder whether I've actually got a couple of questions as a result of the last session. But I wonder whether it could be opened up to members. I don't know. John, had you prepared anything for this? Or you don't? You just doing Q&A? That's
no. I've got a few slides just.
Yeah.
Would you like to do it now? Yeah, we can do it now. It's no problem.
That'd be great. Okay.
You got my slides, anybody?
Got his slides. Who's got it? Yeah, I think Claire's.
I wasn't prepared.
She wasn't prepared. We could, while you're finding them, we could actually, if anybody wants to.
Yeah. Well, any questions, or I could pose the question because it kind of runs off. What?
If you want to do that now, and then we can come back.
Yeah,
once I've got the slide.
It does relate partly to John, but it was after Councillor Aldcroft's question about the drainage in the new developments. I know that one of the issues with planning, and Eddie's still here, he is still here, is that every development has to put forward a plan for their drainage, but they're not checked after the event. And I know that there's been quite a lot of pressure from, you know, to governments over the years to try and improve this. And I know that there are resourcing issues, but is there anything on the horizon that would mean that we can actually start testing the drainage? Because I've heard it, you know, people have said to me the drainage systems don't go in as they're supposed to do. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but there's been people contact me to say that.
Yeah.
I'm happy to take a bit of that as well. So I think that it is a real difficulty, because you're right, we can approve the most amazing drainage design on paper, but once it leaves our desks, the checks are quite difficult, because the highways inspectors will be looking whether the highways are constructed properly, the building inspectors want to make sure the building is constructed properly. Severn Trent will look at the sewers, but the suds sometimes does get missed. We are reliant on members of the public quite a lot reporting issues with a site for us to then go out with the planning enforcement teams. We do that, but obviously it is something that sometimes falls through the cracks. There is something on the horizon. So the Flood and Water Management Act of 2010 did have a schedule 3, which was the establishment of a SUDS approval body. This would effectively set up the legal authority, Shropshire Council, almost like a secondary planning authority, purely looking at SUDS. So we would have the ability to charge a fee separately to look at the SUDS features on a site. We would actually also have funding within the measures to have SUDS inspectors, so actually go out and inspect these features as they're constructed. And then there would also be an obligation to adopt SUDS features, so the council, with funding to come with it, but to adopt those SUDS features going forward, because I think a lot of the time on new development, it's a management company who are looking after the SUDS features rather than a water company or anybody else. And obviously there's issues with that. So that is on the horizon. It should have been probably enacted a couple of years ago. Has been enacted within Wales, and it's up and running at the moment. But on the English side of the border, that hasn't been brought forward yet. There's a lot of noise about bringing it through and enacting Schedule 3, but we haven't quite got there yet as a government level. So that there is something coming, but when that's going to come into force, I don't know.
Thank you.
Julie?
Just two comments. I mean, the first is I'm just wondering why people are nervous about granting conditions, because we've got this comment saying, well, maybe there's another way of doing it. Yeah, but this is a way of doing it. So I'd just be interested to know what's the nervousness around that, because as I understand it, granting conditions are saying, yeah, you've got planning permission, but you can't go ahead because until the infrastructure is adequate, and that seems to me a fairly straightforward thing to start doing if we want to make sure that the infrastructure is adequate. That's the first comment. The second comment is just comparing and contrasting this paper with the next one, which is also a response to a decision. I just don't feel very. I suppose I'm concerned that we have a list of Shropshire Council actions which are all in the future. Whereas the next paper, which refers to social housing policy, which was adopted, only 2 months difference between these two policies. We've got a whole bunch of actions with dates, and further actions that are going to be taken. So I'm just a little bit, I'm impressed with the second one. I'm less impressed, I'm afraid, with this as a response to some recommendations.
Okay, if I can come back to Mark, and that's that third part of the question.
I can answer the second one as well. I think you've heard a lot in the previous presentation, probably that could feature into things actually in this paper. So maybe one of our takeaway suggestions would be that we weave in a lot of what's happened in that first presentation, also to support what this paper covers as well. So I think that it just feels there's some things that we could have done to kind of be much clearer about that, and give that more structure. In terms of the granting conditions, I'll let Eddie talk about specifics. But of course, with any planning application, there is a set of requirements in relation to how the developer proposes to manage water in a sustainable way. This is the whole SUDS piece in some way, isn't it? And that's the difficult bit. Now, when you've got permitted development, of course, that's what's really difficult, because people can do things in a way that are unsustainable that we can't control in a planning sense. But there's a bit for me about, well, what's the public education piece? What's the communications to incentivise behaviours rather than people, having an extension of under permitted development and connecting their waste pipe from that straight into the rainwater drain as well. Those are the sorts of behaviours also that we've got to influence, because they're beyond the eyes of our kind of planning and building control inspectors. And that's the more difficult bit, but perhaps we can't communicate enough or educate enough in that piece, because that's a significant part of it as well. But Eddie, that Grampian's condition piece, is there anything you'd add to that?
Well, I was actually going to refer to Charlie on that one, who's absolutely more of an expert than me on that, so I'll refer to Charlie.
Thanks, Eddie. Just on the Grampian condition bit, there's not per se a problem with Grampian conditions, but our first port would always be for a developer to deal with the issue within the site itself. And all a Grampian condition really means is it prevents development from starting until those works have been completed, but they're specifically, Grampian means they're off-site works. So with more sustainable systems, we can incorporate it through design into the wider development piece. So Grampian conditions just aren't the favoured condition of the planners when looking at development more holistically, but we can use them where there's not that option.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, Kate.
Sorry, yeah. I mean, I think that I had a couple of questions. Good point, I think, Councillor Dean, thank you. And I think the idea was that our recommendations would come here for potential adoption. And so perhaps the committee, I'm not part of this committee, thank you for perhaps the committee could look at how to monitor some of these things and perhaps even put some dates into some of them. The only other thing I was going to add was, Severn Trent Water have actually announced a massive investment into Shropshire. I've written it down somewhere, but it's many millions.
Steal my thunder.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm okay. Well, I was going to ask about that and making sure that we were part of that investment. We're all paying for it, by the way. Our bills will all go up quite a lot, so we want to make sure that we're part of that. But sounds like, John, that's what you're about to talk about.
Is there any way we can influence policy as regards the granting conditions, that we have it set in where everything has been looked at? I haven't forgotten before.
Okay, fine.
No, I haven't forgotten yet. Because we're still talking about.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the same thing. That's yeah.
I'm sure you've got the solution.
Look at the shower as well. Can't we put a condition on planning when we have a housing estate going up that it is checked on and signed off? Because beforehand, put a condition on, as we do on other things in planning, and put conditions on during the meeting, or it should be done in front of us. We could do that. And there's 2 building companies gone busting with church before the sewage has been finished off, as we speak. For instance, what do you do about that if the builders go bust?
Oh, 2 questions there. And we'll give them to you, Charlotte.
Yeah, so I didn't hear too much of that very clearly. I don't know if microphone's on, Tom, but I think the question was around how we firstly enforce conditions in general. So there will be a pre-commencement condition. So details are agreed prior to development commencing. Lots of conditions are multi-stage, so that we would keep an eye on those throughout. And there's going to be a sales problem for a developer unless those conditions are properly discharged. So there's almost a bit around people, when they're buying houses, need to make sure that all those conditions are fulfilled. In terms of how we enforce those, we do rely quite heavily, and we would welcome any investment into ways we can improve the enforcement work around what we do. And then I think that I missed the second bit of the conversation because I'm not sure.
If we work on the first bit that you just responded to first, Charlotte,
yeah,
head shaking here when you said basically that the people who buy the houses should actually look at whether it's right or wrong before they move in. I mean, it's not something you think about. People buy houses, they assume that they're all right. So I don't know. Go on, Mark, you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. The Brambles in Whitchurch is an excellent example of this, which was a housing development with a developer who was crowd-funded on an unadopted development, who had a condition that said the first house can't be occupied until the drainage is adopted, but yet the conveyancers for the purchasers just didn't do their work, in the sense of people moved in, the builder went bust, and Welsh Water would not adopt the drainage system.
Shropshire Council stepped in.
And we've had to be part of a very long and very complex and very difficult process of kind of helping those residents sort that out. But effectively, in an unadopted development, it's entirely a private sector matter, and it's very difficult when our residents are exposed to such degrees of risk. So there's something about just good practice within the building community. Now, maybe bonds, where builders are prepared to, if we ask for a bond, if we know that there's builder of a particular type, we can't force it, but that can help, that kind of mediation. The other bit is just, and we did do it as part of Brambles bit, was kind of issue circulars to the local legal community. But of course, sometimes you get builders, developers, who will offer an incentive that says, and we will pay your legal fees and here's our lawyer. Now that makes it even more difficult, doesn't it, for people in a number of ways. So it is a really difficult space, this.
It is.
There's another question attached to that, Paul, that Charlotte hasn't answered.
If we could put the condition on.
Can we put conditions on the planning?
As a standard thing to do.
Yeah, as a standard.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We do put conditions on in that as standard, so that we can then follow up to cover the drainage issues. There is some handover with building control, so we have to be careful. We are sticking with the planning issues, where building control will then pick up some of the later stages. And you know, there is some work around what it is adoptable bit and which bits sit within planning. We can't kind of overstep our remit, and part of it is around, we try and make all this visible so that all this information is on planning online. And you know, there's a few examples in the one that Mark's just suggested where we are having to help residents deal with the fallout. The time at which it is pivotal is before the conditions are discharged or before the development is sold. So it's making the conditions robust enough, and that is what we're doing. I mean, we're having a full-scale overhaul of all our conditions at the moment, but specifically with this in mind, to make sure that the condition is robust enough, whether it be a Grampian condition or, you know, a standard condition if it's dealt with on site, to make sure that these issues are dealt with at the right stage, and to protect residents who at the time are, you know, effectively consumers buying houses, so that the developer is responsible at the right stage for that before kind of building control and Severn Trent take over.
Thank you. Building control, I think we need to emphasise as well that some people may not use the best people for building control, and that actually Shropshire Council, if you go with Shropshire Council, you actually have that backup and you know that it's sound, don't you? I'm just mentioning that because we've looked at that before. Yes. Anybody wants to say anything else? John, did you want to?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Yeah. Okay, let's go then.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think I was just going to sort of pick up on the second point in the recommendations around how we can better support Severn Trent and how we can help them limit discharges from their network into watercourses. I just put this slide up there because I thought it'd be useful. I mean, some people in the room probably know this already, just to explain how some of the systems operate at the moment. So in a modern estate, we do have that separation of foul and surface water. So foul obviously be water from the toilets, surface water from the roofs and roads. You can see that on the left-hand side there. But one of the main issues where we have these discharges from CSOs, which are called combined sewer overflows, is where stormwater goes into the foul network. That predominantly happens where we've got a combined network. So the red one, the red plan in the centre there, which is Oswestry Town Centre, it just shows you the extent of that combined network. And that's water from the roofs, the roads and the toilets all going into that same network. These areas, they're really difficult to work in because they're they can be quite historic areas. Obviously the streets, they're sort of got houses on both sides, a lot of utilities, and it is really, really difficult to kind of separate those flows. Combined sewer overflows, they are probably the main issues. These are set up effectively as pressure release valves on the network. Because if we didn't have CSOs, all of that water would be backing up into people's properties. So this is how the network has been built over many, many years. These CSOs perform a vital task in preventing urban flooding in people's homes. But obviously the knock-on effect there is during a major storm event, when you've got those surface water flows going into the network, they're then discharging untreated effluent into the nearest watercourse. So that's just a bit of the challenge there. And I think Severn Trent, they have recognised it. And if we can just move on to the next slide, please. So there we go. There's some things that we were talking about. Severn Trent are aware of this issue. It's not something they can just snap their fingers and change. So in their next AMP period, in their next 5-6 year budgets, when they set that, they're allocating a lot of money towards it. So we've got 4.4 billion over the next 25 years in their area. And that's 214 million of that, which is the next AMP period over the next 5 years. Looking at Shropshire in particular, there's some more numbers up there. There's 138 CSOs in Shropshire, and nearly half of them spilled more than 20 times in 2023. I think they are working on a range of projects with that funding, and I just want to pick up on one CSO in particular. And Kate, obviously, you talked about the bathing area within Shrewsbury. This is just upstream of that. This is the Pig Trough. It's quite a well-known CSO in Shrewsbury. I think the data there that we've got from the Severn Rivers Trust website, that in 2023 spilled 48 times for a total of 534 hours. So that's kind of the scale of the problem. And if you look then at the inset picture, again, that's another location where we've got all those combined sewers. So this really is the biggest problem. It's the rainfall entering the network, causing the spills, and that's what this investment from Severn Trent over the next 5 and 25 years is going to start addressing. So we work really closely with Severn Trent, both at that kind of high level, strategic level. Myself, Mark and Hayley met with one of the executives the other day talking about how we can support Severn Trent in some of these projects, but also at that local level with the network technicians identifying where these problems are, how we respond to those issues. One of the biggest things that we can look at is actually removing our highway drainage from the combined network. So particularly with the Pig Trough CSO in particular, we've already had conversations with the network teams about where our highway drains in that area, where they discharge to. A lot of the times that is to the combined network. And so part of the solution maybe for the Pig Trough is looking at a project to remove that highway drain, those highway drains from the combined sewer, and actually putting an independent system to take it into the River Severn or the nearest watercourse. And that's not just happening in the Pig Trough, that's happening across the county. And as Severn Trent develop their programme, that's definitely something we want to work with them on. Additional storage in the network, obviously where you can't take the flows out, you need to create additional storm storage. Again, really expensive, really difficult. This is major investment needed here. Something that Severn Trent haven't got for a lot of these locations is space. So there may be opportunities that we can look to use or offer up council-owned land or highway verge space to try and provide that space for those tanks or upsizing those sewers. So that's definitely, again, conversations that we're having with the network teams, the local teams, and at a strategic level to see where those problems are and what we could, where we could probably possibly help them. And then the last thing we're looking at is actually how we can overall reduce flows going into the network. And Hayley's talked about some of those demonstrator projects. We've got one that's running at the moment up in Oswestry that's looking at a depave. If you could just go on to the next slide. So Morda depave, that's it's in the Morda catchment. That's why we called it that, but it's actually taking place in Oswestry. And if you remember going back to that first slide, Oswestry, particularly the town centre, has a lot of those combined sewer systems where surface water is just entering the network. The whole idea of depave is something that started in America, in Portland, and it's all about taking large areas of hard standing in town centres, urban centres, and trying to basically remove those areas of hard standing and replace them with things like rain gardens, water butts, and you can see up there like maybe larger scale public open space areas, converting them to sort of garden areas to try and intercept that rainfall that would otherwise go into the network, improve infiltration and actually hold on to that water for longer. It's something that's going on in Oswestry. We've got the Shropshire Wildlife Trust helping deliver that for us. And we're working with the town council and looking at other private individuals, private businesses. Can we use some of this money to actually break up that hard surface? And to be honest, I mean, look at it, it looks a lot nicer than just a big area of hard standing. And I think that work is ongoing. We're in the first year of the project at the moment. We've got up till 2027. I think this is definitely something that as a local authority, obviously we're working in Oswestry at the moment, but 100% is something we can start looking at other town centres and whether the similar sort of approaches could be applied. And it's potentially also something that we can maybe grab some of that money from Severn Trent as well, whether there's those opportunities. So I know they've been doing projects, I think it's in Mansfield or Macclesfield, very similar approach, but this is definitely something that we as an authority could really implement and have a major beneficial impact. So yeah, that was just what I wanted to cover. So any questions on any of that?
Any questions, anyone? Yes, Kate?
Yeah, just one question. I mean, obviously that all looks great. It is a significant investment. Everyone's water bill's going to be going up. How can they be, I'm thinking, local town and parish councils feed into this process to make sure that, you know, that I know Severn Trent will have an idea of what they want to do, but how does the local community influence this big investment, welcome investment?
John,
it's definitely something we can take back to Severn Trent Water and actually ask them what is the route for communities and town and parish council. And Mark, the meeting that we had the other week with one of the chief execs there, he was really keen on sort of engaging more with the authority. So yeah, something we can definitely take away.
Do we need that recommendation then that we do that?
I am writing it down.
Oh, there you are. There you are, Kate. Well done. And I'm assuming everyone is happy with that, and we don't have to vote on that because that's really good. I think that was a very good move. Yeah. Okay, any questions? No, I was going to ask you actually, Kate. This obviously is an update against the progress that's been made. Are you happy with the progress that's been made, or do you have problems with any of it?
I mean, obviously, we all want things to happen faster than they do. I'm just wondering whether, so that it's not simply a document that's just on a shelf, that there is some ongoing monitoring through this committee, that actually, and you know, perhaps begin to put some times and dates in some of these.
Right,
If the committee's happy, I think that one of the questions I was going to ask was about the frequency that you bring back or you keep maintaining, because you have a responsibility in terms of reference to the committee around flooding. And tied into that could be what we've started to touch on with all the big strategic developments we talked about, is whether we look at how we bring back that information and or what's happening with that and the progress with that, and the impacts and the opportunities and where that's going next, with what extra sort of raised there around the river water quality and how we bring that in and together, and then look at definitely how this committee is monitoring that going forward.
I think probably 6 monthly, because you need gaps, don't you? Because there's a lot of work involved and everything. So I think everybody be happy with that. Yeah, Roger.
Yeah.
You're welcome. But okay, everybody happy? Yeah. So we'll stay 6 months. I mean, some of us, we've got elections coming up, of course, and the committee will change, I'm sure, in one way or another. But yeah, so it's important to keep an eye on this.
What we'll do is, with Captain Claire, we'll have a look at how, because as we found, this is not something which sits neatly with one person in the council or one area, is how, as a scrutiny team, we put some capacity in around this in terms of looking across it, and supporting this going forward. So I think what we'll do is we'll work with the officers and through the officers with others to look at how we can put together a bit of a plan or a programme of work, and know, so coming back every 6 months, what is that going to look like? Because some of what we're talking about will be reported in 6 months. Some of it might be 24 months in terms of when it's to. We've got that set out, and we know what the impact is likely to be for those points. I think that, and obviously, I think that's been, from my perspective as a scrutiny manager, listen to the conversation and the level of questioning. The debate's been really good.
And if I can just say, I'd like personally, and I'm sure you would, Kate, like to thank the officers, because the work involved in this across the board has been immense, absolutely immense.
Yeah, absolutely, and everything's run really smoothly. So yeah, thanks to Tom especially.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kate, and thank you for looking after us. Okay, we're now going to move on. We've got estimates follow-up on social housing, the housing strategy recommendation implementation. Thank you.
Hi, hello Chair, it's Jane here. You have a report in front of you relating to this. I won't talk you through the whole thing, but you will see, obviously, this is an update on the Housing Strategy Action Plan, which you last saw as a committee on the 23rd of April. And it's just really updating the committee on progress on that action plan since that date. So if we turn to the action plan, which is on the Appendix 1, I'll just pick out a few things from that to point out to you, and then take any questions that anybody has about that. So recommendation 1 from the original action plan focused on the allocations policy and scheme and how we make sure that the registered providers that we allocate properties to from our housing register, how they actually adhere to the allocations policy. So we do now have a set of formal monitoring meetings with the registered providers to make sure that they adhere to the nominations agreements that they've signed with us. Those kicked off in April of this year. And there has been a much more systematic process of challenge to landlords, social landlords, who may sometimes prefer not to take those who have the highest band in terms of their housing need. Sometimes they prefer to take people who perhaps they feel are going to be easier to manage in the properties, but of course that then means that Shropshire Council is struggling to house those in greatest need. So that challenge is happening on a much more regular basis now. Pleased to say that that has meant a much higher proportion of lettings of properties are being made to those who are in that highest band 1 of housing need. So from the council's perspective, that's a real positive, because it means that people are progressing and their housing needs are being taken care of in the right way. There has just been very recently in the last month a launch of the upgraded version of the Abbey system as well. That just happened at the end of October. That should really help us in terms of reporting on the way that allocations happen. It should make it easier for us to monitor what's going on in terms of who's getting housed and by whom and how rapidly. There is some continued testing. It has gone live as a system, but we're now monitoring how that performs with our landlords. So those are the updates in terms of action recommendation 1. On recommendation 2, which is trying to enhance the performance of the strategic housing function, linking into other areas of council activity. We have had some changes to the structure of the housing team. That's partly related to some of the restructures that have been happening across the council, but we do now have a strategy officer who's reporting into the strategic housing and commissioning manager role. That strategic housing commissioning manager role is currently vacant. Lucy Heath occupied that. She took a promotional opportunity somewhere else, but that's now out to advert, so we should be getting somebody into that post, because we see that as a really critical role to making sure that we're delivering the right services in housing. It should also be noted the housing strategy has been picked up as a key part of the Marches Strategic Partnership and the Strategic Infrastructure Partnership, where we're working with neighbouring counties and other partners. So we're picking that up as we go, working with our neighbouring counties to hopefully combine our resources and efforts to get some good outcomes. Also want to reference that we have recently commissioned the Housing Lin, which is an agency, a consultancy, and this is a piece of work funded by external grants, not by Shropshire Council, to complete a strategic needs assessment for Shropshire's supported accommodation. So this is something we're really keen to focus in on, something that we want to work more consistently and systematically across the piece with our registered provider partners and others. So we're quite excited to see that coming forwards, and recommendations coming out of that will help to form our future strategic direction. So we hope that we will be in a position to report back on that and evaluate the recommendations from that and bring them into a future update of the housing strategy. Moving on to recommendation 3, which was looking at a place-based approach to housing and economic development, particularly looking at commissioning affordable and supported housing based on evidence need. We have previously pulled together housing commissioning priorities and shared those with registered providers so that they're really clear on what our priorities were as Shropshire Council. As a result of that, there has been some specific activity as well to deliver our housing priorities. We did achieve planning consent for the scheme at Coton Hill House in Shrewsbury. Tannery East, the conversion of that building to a temporary accommodation function, I'm pleased to say was actually approved at planning very recently, just last week. Or sorry, I think it was earlier this week. That will I hope give us some really good responses to our temporary accommodation needs for Shropshire and Shrewsbury in particular. I think there is also a piece of work that we want to progress with. This is one of our amended actions around developing a housing strategy for Shrewsbury, particularly linking to the Big Town Plan to our economic goals, and to some of the housing needs that came out of our housing needs survey in the last couple of years. So we are procuring some consultancy support to help to define this for the Smithfield Riverside scheme, which will help to contribute to that. That is a piece of work that's being externally funded for us. In terms of recommendation 4, which talks about investment in social housing, acknowledging the specific needs of rural settlements, I'm pleased to say that we have now got approval for 3 key strategies, which are the Sustainable Affordable Warmth Strategy, the Independent Living and Specialist Accommodation Strategy, and the Preventing Homelessness and Rough Sleeping Strategy. All of those have been approved over the course of 2024, which puts us in a much stronger position than we were previously, in terms of being able to be clear about what our requirements are in a particular way, referencing Shropshire and its specific needs, including its rural needs. There is a further action, which is a new action that we've put in, which is to have a new affordable, intermediate and rural housing strategy consolidated as part of the wider housing strategy. So we want to specifically draw in rural housing needs and be more specific about those. Recommendation 5 picked up on opportunities to explore and pursue opportunities to bring in funding. So we do meet very regularly with Homes England to pursue funding opportunities, and now also with West Midlands Combined Authority, who have been delegated responsibility for those Homes England funds for this area. So we have strengthened those ties. We're developing those constantly to make sure that they understand the rural requirements of Shropshire and don't purely have an urban focus on the West Midlands conurbation, which would otherwise be a risk. And as referenced earlier, the March's Strategic Infrastructure Partnership has picked up on funding for rural housing as well, which is a key piece for us. We have also initiated meetings with our health and social care colleagues, because we are wanting to really develop a stronger understanding of the needs both for supported living, but also intermediate housing options in the rural setting, so that we can support key worker housing that will thereby support social care as well. I think moving on to recommendation 6, the council review and implementation of any new legislation on short-term lets. There hasn't been any so far. We've been monitoring this to see anything coming up, but we are going to work with our March's Strategic Infrastructure Partnership and the housing subgroup of that around the potential to lobby for legislation relating to short-term lets, because the risk of this displacing local residents and taking homes out of circulation for permanent housing is a risk that impacts on the whole range of the Marchers Forward Partnership councils, which all have the same sort of rural challenges. Chair, I'll leave that there. If there's any questions anybody has or anything anybody wants to know, very happy to answer any points. Thank you.
Review that we are reviewing with Hammond.
I was just going to ask if we, in our recommendations on that final point about Airbnbs and short-term lets, can't give that prominent status and urgent status. The house, there's a terrace in my ward that last year 4 people received notice to quit, and in a few months' time, all of them was turned into Airbnbs. And it seems to be building up. I know there's that balance between freedom and the need to control, and I think Julian, you were concerned about this as well. And it was very prominent a few months ago, or about a year, 18 months ago, but it seems to have gone off the agenda. But could we put that back on the agenda?
Absolutely.
Please, that some legislation, some care is needed. But apart from that, I'm concerned about people who are vulnerable and the need for work with the homeless and other housing needs. And a short time ago, I couldn't attend, but we had a presentation by one of the members of staff that work within the housing sector in the council, and she told us that one of the challenges that they were having in all aspects of their work was that they had already lost 5 posts through redundancy or the council policy, and they're expecting more redundancies to follow. How do you think the council, in terms of all these six ambitions, are going to cope with that level of staff reduction across the piece? Now, I know you're saying, it's where the world, but I'm asking, are we trying to fool people by putting forward what is quite an upmarket type of report today, when we know that there are going to be massive challenges ahead when we're losing staff in significant numbers?
Jane, would you like to respond?
Yes, I can assure you that there are no further losses and from the housing team. So about looking specific housing strategy and housing development. Within the world of housing, we do have the option to support some of these roles to a degree through the housing revenue account, because some of activity that these roles serve is in overseeing the housing revenue account, so that's a legitimate use of those funds. And
Jane,
that's provided.
Jane, can you stop? We lost you at the beginning. You were breaking up. Perhaps if you switch your camera off, we can hear you better.
I'll give that a go. Is that any better?
Oh, miles better.
Okay. Apologies. Okay. So what I was saying is that, first of all, there are no further job losses anticipated in that housing related largely at first moment. You're both looking at housing strategy and development. The posts in this area are quite legitimately in part funded through the housing revenue account, and that's because in strategy terms they also reference housing revenue account, and that gives them a degree of protection.
Okay, you are breaking up, but you did say that there's going to be no further redundancies in that area. We did hear that. Thank you. Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. I note in the amending actions it says a planned restructure to move has been suspended indefinitely pending wider council restructuring. What does that mean, please?
Sorry, oh right, yes, that's referencing the, there are colleagues in the planning policy team who work to Eddie West, who have responsibility for negotiations with developers, with housing associations, and with landowners to bring forward affordable housing development. We had a proposal to move, not to reduce the numbers of those team members, but just to move those team members to sit with the housing strategy function. But we've decided to defer that move until we have more clarity over some of the wider restructure plans for the council. So it doesn't impact on the numbers of staff members in that function, or indeed on the work that they do. It's just a reference to some potential different structure arrangements that we could have.
Okay. Thank you. Julian?
Yeah, it's a question about lobbying, I suppose, really. So we've got this 1.5 million figure in the air. We know that Angela Rayner says that she's very keen for a lot of that to be council housing, but it's not yet clear how that will be funded. There was a really good report headed by Southwark, which had 100 councils backing it on securing the future of council housing. It's a shame that we aren't named in that list. But I'm just wondering, how far are we involved in that discussion and pushing for some really chunky solutions to enable councils to build council homes?
Yeah, so Chair, it's quite encouraging to see that there is a real kind of movement across local authorities to step up and deliver more council housing. In fact, Shropshire is already very well placed in this realm because we have been building new council housing for several years, unlike many local authorities who may not necessarily have made that move. So I think we're probably already fairly ahead of the game. In addition, having the benefit of a very expert housing development team from Cornovy, which is now working alongside Star Housing to deliver more HRA housing stock. Yeah, in terms of the plans for the future, I guess we're still very much in the hands of government to see what their announcements will be, what they intend to do. It's a bit difficult to read the runes at the moment and understand how much funding is likely to come forward. Certainly the announcement regarding councils being able to retain the income from sales of right to buy properties, the capital receipts, to apply to new build council housing, that will be very welcome in respect of us being able to sustain our HRA unit numbers for the future.
Thank you. Jane, if I can just say, after that, an uplift really. I came across someone about a week ago who came up to me and they recognised me, and they wanted to say that actually, well, not me, the team, they said like he was actually sleeping rough on Bailey Street in Oswestry. This was probably about 3 or 4 years ago, and he had turned his life around. He has accommodation in my area, and the other thing he added was that he's eating really well now. So I just want you to take that back to your team, because you make such a difference in instances like that in housing people. So thank you very much, and thank you to the team.
Oh, that's fantastic to hear. Thank you, Joyce. I'll definitely pass that on. Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma. I think I heard that in recommendation 2, there's a housing strategy development manager post now vacant. Did I hear you say that has now been advertised?
The title is now Strategic Housing and Commissioning Manager. And yes, that is out to advert.
Okay. Everybody happy with that? Is everybody happy with the recommendations? And you wanted one added, didn't you, Alan? Did you get that? Down to me.
Yeah, I think Alan, one, if I've got this right, if you wanted to ensure that recommendation 6 was actually around the Airbnb, but was given high profile and made sure it was back in the conversation. I think
I was going to emphasise the point that's in there.
Yeah.
Made about working with others and give that high priority.
And maybe to look at somebody to look into that and see where we are with this. If that's all right. Yeah. Okay. So can we have a vote on those recommendations? Paul put there, and next seconding. That's fine. Thank you. So we now move on to, we're nearly there, everybody. With economy, environment, overview and scrutiny. Oh, thank you, Jane. Sorry. Economy and environment overview and scrutiny committee work programme.
So, in terms of the work programme for the committee, one of the areas which I want to flag now and just get a view of your next meeting is scheduled for the 23rd of January. We mentioned earlier about flooding being part of what the remit of the committee is an area of responsibility. The other bit is around crime and disorder partnership and crime and disorder aspects. It's not currently in the work programme, but I think it's a topic probably that needs to come back to the committee. If you're happy, we can include that in the work programme.
Everybody happy with that? I'm happy with that. Yeah. Everybody saying yes.
And then there's it links actually to the conversation which you've just been having in terms of planning and new housing developments. There was a task and finish group when the report in 2023 around new housing developments that included looking at building control, which is what Joyce referred to. We'll be looking at bringing back an update. In the same way as you had the report now on social housing and housing strategy, there'll be a progress report back on that as well. So those were the 2 main items in there. Now, you have a further committee meeting penciled in, but I think it's early April, which is going to be.
I think we moved it to March, didn't we? Yeah, I think. I sent it.
I thought we moved it.
We'll see. I suppose what I mean with that is timing wise, is thinking about when that lands pre-election period. But on that, you have temporary accommodation as a topic. So I mean, timing wise as well, if that takes place, it fits very much what you just sort of heard from Jane there in terms of some of the developments that have taken place. Is there anything, Mark?
Yeah, just to kind of maybe share a couple of things with you from the budget and other kind of communications from government. So you may not have picked this up, but all of the funding that government allocated to local enterprise partnerships, now ours wound up last year, some were still in existence, will end at the end of March, and there is no plan to extend any of that. So that's quite fundamental in terms of how that's been supporting the work of a range of things in our economic partnership. You'll have also picked up that UK shared prosperity funding is being reduced. The 3-year programme we're currently working to is 2.6 billion nationally over from October 22 to March 25. That's dropping to 900 million. So that's at least a third reduction. Two-thirds reduction, leaving a third. And the other bit, which we've had a heads up from the county council network on, is that the government are likely to release on the 28th of November a devolution white paper that is likely to promote quite wide-ranging economic development, housing, transportation changes. That could include things like the regionalisation of some parts of strategic planning. It could be us being told what region we're part of. It could include also things like housing targets being decided regionally. So there's a range of things in that I just want to put on your radar, that if that lands on 28th of November, you might want to discuss that in January. Say, what does it mean for Shropshire?
Yeah, can we find a date that we can, yes. So we got on January.
Well, the January one you just agreed to put on. So I guess the question might be with that is, number one, if it's significant enough, it doesn't matter whether you've got a committee meeting in or not.
No,
you might want to add one in anyway.
That's right.
And secondly, you might want to start with a briefing, an all-member briefing, and then roll into a committee meeting. But we'll know by the end of the night.
In this space, just in case it's really bad. Have you any insights into this, Alan?
I'm sorry,
You weren't listening.
No, I heard you talk about devolution.
Yeah, have you any insights into what is coming our way or not?
No, but prevented from hearing from you because of the noise. So could you just repeat that, please?
Oh God. Would you like to repeat what you just said about what we think is coming down the line?
What you specifically referred to me.
Yes, but it's what Mark has just said, that what the government are doing.
What I was going to suggest is that it is budget in all its aspects, both coming from government and Shropshire Council, because in January or before, the council will be looking at making the budget for next year.
Yeah.
Want to stay clear of the election period, but sometime I think we do need to look at it, both the changes that Mark referred to, which is coming down from government, but also some of the decisions that council is going to make and recommend to the full council in February. I think it would be good to spend some time maybe looking at that to see in the areas that this scrutiny committee deal.
Rachel.
Thanks. I haven't got it in front of me, but I think we had a little table, didn't we, of things we were going to talk about. One of them was a briefing on for town and parish councils regarding maintenance, grounds maintenance, and possible devolution from Shropshire Council to town and parish councils. I think that's. I know it's maybe not as big a thing.
I think it's moved on. It's moved on a little bit.
But we haven't had a briefing on it.
I don't think it's what it was. I think it's altered now.
But we haven't. It's done.
Yeah. We realise that. I think it was realised that actually one size doesn't fit all, and therefore, you know, if parish councils want to come to Shropshire Council and say we'd like to do this, then fine, but it's not.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah. The only one specifically in that space at the moment is Shrewsbury Town Council.
Okay.
And sorry, one last bit is just to say that we are progressing the briefings. That's just reminded me. And so you will have seen, I think, an invite that's going out, or will be going out very soon, the 2nd of December, around maintenance as well.
That was today.
It's just to highlight highlight that and just trying to make sure that I know it's an annual event. But yeah. So it's really,
If you really want to.
yeah, it's really looking at making sure that takes place in time.
Okay. So, anything else you want to say, Roger? Or is it Nick, you want to say something about the work programme? And then
No, it is somewhere in the work programme. We need to look at budget in the round and all that encompasses, without causing the officers any extra work. It just as we need to look at it, both what's coming down and what's coming up, if I can use that word.
We're going to be jammed in the middle of this. Right, thank you very much. I think we'll leave item 9 now. Move on to item 10. Date of the next meeting, Thursday, 23rd of January, at 2 o'clock. Have a lovely Christmas, everybody.
I'll just ask the live stream to end.